"Put her down, boys." 4 words, said quiet. That was all it took, and what happened next would cost those 6 riders more than they ever bargained for, because the man they were ignoring was Della Mercer's father, and not a soul among them had any idea what that meant. She was standing in the trail dust with 6 outlaws around her on horseback, and her arms aching from where they'd hauled her off the road. She hadn't seen her father in 9 years. Most of the territory still said his name in whispers, if they said it at all. She stumbled, caught herself, kept her chin up. 6 of them, 6 dusty horses, 1 road leading nowhere good. Then she saw him, a man at the edge of the chaparral, still as a fence post in the heat shimmer, watching. He hadn't drawn his gun. He didn't shout. He just said those 4 words. If that kind of story speaks to you, do me a favor and subscribe to this channel before we go further. Drop your city in the comments and let me know how far this tale has traveled. You want to stay until the very end. I promise you what happens on that trail outside Pinto Wells will stay with you. Now let's go back. Back to the summer of 1885, back to the crease of land where Kansas bled into Indian territory, back to a place called Pinto Wells that wasn't much more than a water stop, a general store, and 400 people who minded their business because minding anything else was liable to get you hurt. The heat that summer was the kind that had teeth. It came up off the flats before sunrise, and it didn't let go until well past dark. And even then it sat in the walls of buildings and came out again when you're trying to sleep. The grass along the creek had gone brittle by June. By July, it snapped underfoot like old promises. The horses at the livery stood in their stalls with their heads low and their eyes half shut, as though they'd made some private peace with the misery of the season. Della Mercer had not made any peace with anything. She was 22 years old, slight, dark-haired, with her mother's eyes and a stubbornness that came from both sides of a family that had never backed down easily from anything. She'd come to Pinto Wells 8 months earlier in the company of a man named Coyle, which was about the worst decision she'd made in a life that had already seen its share of bad ones. Coyle was 37, broad through the shoulders, with a square jaw and pale gray eyes that never quite settled into warmth, no matter how hard his face tried. He had money, which in Pinto Wells in 1885 meant he had men, and men with guns, and a piece of land along the creek that other men with smaller holdings looked at the way hungry people look at bread through a window. He had the kind of smile that arrived quickly and left without saying goodbye. Della had mistaken it for charm for about 3 weeks before she understood what it was. What it was control, dressed up in a good coat and a confident voice, but control all the same. By October, she'd stopped arguing with him when he corrected her in front of company. By December, she'd stopped looking at the door of his house and thinking about what was on the other side of it. By spring, she was watching the road out of Pinto Wells the way a trapped bird watches a gap in the rafters. And when she finally saw her chance, she took it without a second thought and without a single regret. She left at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday, with a satchel, a wool blanket, $43 she'd been hiding in the lining of a hatbox for 6 months, and a letter she'd written to the territorial marshal's office in Guthrie describing in careful detail every piece of property Coyle had stolen, cheated, or threatened out of his neighbors since 1882. She figured the letter was either going to get her killed or get him arrested, and she planned to be far enough down the road by the time anyone opened it that it wouldn't matter which. She made it 14 miles before they found her. She heard the horses before she saw them. 6 sets of hooves on the hard pan, coming fast from the northeast where the old cattle road cut through the brush. She didn't run. Running on open ground against mounted men was not a plan. It was a prayer, and Della Mercer's prayers had been going unanswered long enough that she'd stopped wasting them on the impossible. She kept walking. She told herself it might be travelers. She told herself it might be nobody who mattered. Then she heard Wade Cutter's voice, and she knew. "Miss Coyle," he said. He was calling her by Brick's name. That told her everything about what this was. Cutter was Brick Coyle's head man, his enforcer, the one who delivered messages that didn't have any letters in them. He was lean and sun-dark, with a thin blonde mustache, and the quiet, patient manner of a man who had spent years waiting for other people to make mistakes. He rode up alongside her without hurrying. The other 5 men spread out behind him in a loose crescent, not so much surrounding her as reminding her that surrounding her was an option they had and hadn't used yet. "Mr. Coyle would like you to come back," Cutter said. He had the voice of a man explaining something simple to someone he found mildly tedious. "I expect he would," Della said. "It's a long way to anywhere from here. Hot day for walking, I've noticed." Cutter looked out at the flat country ahead of her, the shimmering distance, the pale thread of road leading toward the Kansas line. He looked back at her. He didn't smile exactly, but something moved in his face that was close to it. "There's no marshal coming," he said. "Not today, not any day soon. Mr. Coyle has an arrangement with a circuit judge out of Fort Smith that makes certain things move slow. You understand what I'm telling you." "I understand," Della said. She kept her voice even. She'd learned that much, at least, in 8 months of Brick Coyle. "Good. Then let's go back and sort this out like reasonable people." He reached down from his saddle and took hold of her arm, and Della went cold and still in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature. She was thinking about fighting. She was measuring it the way her mother had taught her to measure things before she did them, adding up what she had against what she was facing, running the numbers. 6 men on horses, a satchel with $43 and no weapon, 14 miles from Pinto Wells, and the nearest ranch a good 4 miles east. The numbers did not add up. The numbers had never once added up for Della Mercer in her whole life, and she had fought anyway more times than she could count. But she was tired today, bone-tired in the way that goes deeper than sleep can reach, and she was trying to decide whether tired and smart was better than brave and broken when she heard the boot steps. Slow, deliberate boot steps, coming up the road from the south. Not hurrying, not stopping either. A man stepped out of the heat shimmer at the edge of the chaparral where the mesquite grew thick along the creek bank. He was somewhere past 50, lean as rawhide, with a face that had been lived in hard and put away rough, a face that told you it had been in weather and arguments, and worse things than both. He wore a gray hat with a crease down the middle, and a canvas duster that had seen too many seasons to remember what color it started out. He carried a single-action Colt on his right hip, holstered low, and his hands were loose at his sides. He stopped about 12 feet from Wade Cutter's horse. He looked at Della. He looked at Cutter. He looked at the 5 men spread out behind. He said 4 words. "Put her down, boys." Cutter looked at him the way you look at something that has wandered onto the road that you're about to have to move. "Keep riding, old-timer," Cutter said. "This doesn't concern you." The man in the gray hat looked at Della again. Something moved across his face, quick as a cloud shadow. Then it was gone, replaced by the same flat, unhurried calm as before. "I'm going to ask you once more," he said. "Let the woman go." Cutter's jaw tightened. One of the men behind him shifted in his saddle. The crescent of horses tightened a fraction, the way a fist tightens before it closes. And Della Mercer, watching this tired-looking man in a worn duster standing alone in the heat against 6 armed riders, felt the first stirring of something she hadn't let herself feel in a long, long time. Something she didn't have a name for yet. Something that felt, in some distant way she couldn't quite reach, like the particular kind of stillness her father used to carry into a room. She told herself she was imagining it. She wasn't. His name was Amos Mercer, and there were men still living, fewer than there used to be, but some, who would cross the street rather than step onto one that had Amos Mercer on it. He had been, at various points in his life, a cavalry scout, a deputy marshal, and the man the marshals called when they needed something done that they couldn't put in a report afterward. He was the kind of man you didn't know was dangerous until it was too late to do anything useful with that information. He had been quiet for 9 years, He'd put the gun work away in 1876, the year his wife died, the year he made the worst decision of his life, the year he handed a 7-year-old daughter to his wife's sister in Abilene because he didn't trust himself to raise her right when he was the way he was then. He'd gone up into the breaks of the Cimarron, and he'd stayed gone, doing ranch work and odd jobs, and trying to sand himself down to something that could live with other people without the violence always sitting there behind his eyes. He'd been doing a reasonable job of it, all things considered. Then, 3 weeks ago, a letter had arrived at the Dunnigan brothers' spread where he was working summer fence. The return address was from the Methodist Church in Abilene. His wife's sister had passed. The letter was brief and sorry about that, and had mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that Della had been in Pinto Wells with a man named Coyle, and that some people were worried. Amos Mercer had read those 4 words standing in the sun beside a fence post he'd just tamped, and he'd put the letter in his pocket, and he'd gone back to the bunkhouse and saddled his horse. And he hadn't stopped riding until he hit the Kansas Territory line. He'd been looking for his daughter for 11 days when he found her on this trail with Wade Cutter's hand on her arm. He had not introduced himself to Cutter. He did not plan to. "Mister," Cutter said, and now the patience in his voice had sharpened into something else. "I don't know who you think you are, but you're standing between me and a private matter. Last chance to walk on." "It's a nice day for walking," Amos said. "I've been doing a lot of it lately." One of the riders behind Cutter laughed, short, dismissive, the kind of laugh that's also a threat. Amos turned his head slowly and looked at the man who had laughed. He didn't say anything, he just looked. The man's laugh died in his throat. Cutter reached for his revolver. He was fast. Amos Mercer was faster in a way that didn't look like speed, the way a rattlesnake doesn't look like it's moving until it already has. The Colt was out and level before Cutter's hand had cleared leather, and the hammer was back, and Amos hadn't moved his feet or changed his expression. "You touch that gun," Amos said, "and we're going to end this right here on this road, in a way that none of your boys will feel good about riding back to Teale." The 5 riders went still. Horses shifted. Dust moved in the heat. Cutter's hand was frozen at the butt of his revolver. He looked at the Colt barrel pointed at his chest, and then he looked at the eyes of the man holding it, and something he saw there made him take his hand off the gun slowly. The way you take your hand off something you've just realized is hot. "Who are you?" Cutter said. "I'm a man who's tired from riding," Amos said, "and I'm asking you one more time to let that woman go." Cutter looked at Della. He looked at the old man. He looked at the 5 riders who were watching him to see what they were supposed to do. He let go of Della's arm. She stepped back. She kept her eyes on the man in the gray hat, and the feeling she'd had a moment ago was stronger now, pulling at something old and buried deep. Something from before she knew what grief was. "This isn't settled," Cutter said. "I know it isn't," Amos said. "But today, it's settled enough. Ride on." They rode. Not fast, not the way men ride when they're running. Slow and deliberate, the way men ride when they want you to know they'll be back. Amos watched them go until they were a smear of dust against the white sky. Then he lowered the Colt and thumbed the hammer down and holstered it in one motion that was so practiced it barely qualified as a movement. He turned to Della. She was staring at him. "You all right?" he said. "Who are you?" she said. He looked at her for a long moment, long enough that she felt the weight of what he was deciding. Then he said, "My name is Amos Mercer." Della went very still. The satchel in her hand felt suddenly too heavy. The road felt unsteady under her boots. She heard her own breathing, careful and slow, the way she breathed when she was trying not to react to something before she understood it. "Della," he said, "I know you don't owe me anything. I know that. I'm not here to ask for anything. I just needed to know you were all right." 9 years, she said. "Yes, 9 years, and you just needed to know I was all right. I know how it sounds. Do you?" He didn't look away from her, and she gave him credit for that at least. A lot of men, given what he'd done, would have looked at the ground. He didn't. He looked at her straight, with those dark brown eyes that she suddenly remembered the way you remember something from a dream with your whole body before your brain catches up. Her father's eyes. "There's a spring about 2 miles south," he said finally. "Water, shade, somewhere to stop and think. I'll take you there if you want, or I'll ride on and leave you to it. You decide." Della looked back down the road the way Cutter had gone. She looked at the flat, shimmering country ahead, the pale road going north toward Kansas. She looked at this man, her father, this stranger who moved like violence and talked like a man who'd gotten used to getting no answer to his prayers. 2 miles south, she said. He nodded. He picked up his horse's reins from where he'd looped them on a mesquite branch and started walking. Della fell in beside him, close enough to talk, far enough to make clear she hadn't decided anything yet about what any of this was. Now, if you've been riding along with this story and you haven't subscribed yet, do it right now. Drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from and what time it is there. We've got a long way to go yet, and I don't want you missing a single mile of it. The spring Amos Mercer led her to was a modest thing, a trickle out of a limestone shelf into a pool about the size of a wagon bed, shaded by a stand of cottonwood trees that were the greenest living things in about 3 miles of dry country. A man who knew this land had found this spot, and Amos had found it the second day after he crossed the territory line, which told Della something about the kind of attention he paid to his surroundings. He built a small fire, the compact, efficient kind, the kind a man builds when he's been doing it alone for years. He set a tin coffee pot in the coals without fuss. Della sat on a flat rock beside the pool and took off her boots and let her feet rest in the water. And for a little while neither of them said anything. The silence between them wasn't comfortable exactly. It was honest, which is sometimes worse. "She didn't tell me where you'd gone," Della said finally. "Aunt Helen. She said you'd gone away to work, and you'd come back when you were ready." "Helen was being kind," Amos said. "Was she being kind, or was she protecting me from the fact that you didn't plan to come back?" He was quiet for a moment. He poured coffee into 2 cups. He brought one to her and she took it without saying thank you. Not out of rudeness, but because she wasn't there yet. "Both," he said. "I wasn't in any shape to raise a child. Not after your mother died. Not with the way I was carrying myself then. I told myself it was better for you." Which was true. It was also easier for me, and those 2 things being true at the same time doesn't make either one of them less true. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you I did it purely on your behalf. Della looked at the fire. "That's more honest than I expected," she said. "I've had 9 years to get my story straight. Figured I might as well tell the straight version." She almost smiled. "Not quite." "What do you know about Brick Coyle?" she said. "I know he's a man who likes to own things," Amos said. "I know he's got the circuit judge in his pocket and the marshal's office moving slow. I know he sent 6 men after you, and that he'll send more. He will. Wade Cutter doesn't quit. I know the type. Do you know how to stop the type?" Amos looked at her over his coffee cup. In the firelight, his face was all shadow and angle. The face of an old photograph, the face she'd been carrying in the back of her mind since she was 7 years old. Never quite clear. Never quite gone. "I've had some experience in that direction," he said. She studied him. She was thinking about the moment on the trail when he'd drawn that colt. She'd seen men draw before. She'd seen fast men who were proud of being fast, men who practiced in front of mirrors and talked about it at bars. Amos Mercer hadn't looked proud. He'd looked like a man picking up a hammer, easy and certain. Like it was just the most obvious tool for the work. "Who were you?" she said. "Before." He turned his cup in his hands. The fire popped once and settled. "Deputy Marshal for Judge Harding, out of Kansas City. Before that, Cavalry Scout. Before that, a number of things I won't put in any order because the order isn't flattering. And the man who said put her down on that road? That was just me, he said. That part doesn't go away. She thought about that. She thought about her mother, who had been kind and steady and practical, who had kept the household running and kept the peace, and never once in Della's memory seemed afraid of the man she'd married. Not because she was naive about what he was, but because she knew exactly what he was, and had chosen him anyway with her whole heart, and kept on choosing him. Her mother had been smarter than Della had given her credit for. I need to get to Guthrie, Della said. I have a letter that needs to reach the Territorial Marshal's office. It documents everything Coyle's done since 1882. Land theft, coercion, intimidation. 2 men who disappeared after disputing his claims on their water rights. I've been collecting it for 6 months. Amos was quiet. He was looking at her with something new in his eyes. Something she didn't have a name for right away. And then she did. It was something like respect. The plain kind, not the kind men wore when they were trying to impress women, but the kind that happens when someone does something you didn't know they had in them. You built a case, he said. I built a case. I spent 6 months building it while living in his house and eating at his table, and acting like a woman who didn't notice anything and had no plans at all. Your mother would have done exactly the same thing, Amos said. Della looked at the fire again. Her throat was tight. The letter's in my satchel, she said. If Cutter's men catch up to me before I reach Guthrie, the letter burns. If Coyle has the marshal's office in his pocket the way you say, the letter might not matter anyway. It matters, Amos said. Papers always matter. Even when the wrong people are in the right offices, paper matters. It creates problems that won't go away. He set down his cup. Tell me about Coyle's operation. Men, money, ground, she told him. She told him about the 6 men Cutter ran, plus another 8 who worked the ranch. She told him about the 2 Cheyenne men Coyle had hired from the reservation who tracked for him and could follow a trail across Bear Rock. She told him about the arrangement with Judge Crumby in Fort Smith and the understanding Coyle had with the Deputy Territorial Marshal in Pinto Wells, a man named Selby who had 3 children and a wife with expensive tastes and a fear of brick Coyle that he dressed up as professional deference. She told him about the 2 men who had disappeared, their names and their holdings, and the dates and the way it had been made to look like they'd just ridden on, which was easy to believe in territory where men rode on all the time for 100 reasons. She told him about the water rights, which was really what it was all about at the bottom. The Pinto Wells Creek ran south through some of the best grazing land in that part of the territory, and whoever controlled the water controlled who could graze and who couldn't, and Coyle had been buying, threatening, and occasionally making problems disappear until he controlled most of it. Amos listened to all of it without interrupting. He had the way of listening that Della remembered without remembering, the focused, unhurried way. The way that said whatever you're saying is the only thing happening right now. She'd spent 8 months with a man who listened the way people look at a window, only far enough in to catch their own reflection. When she finished, Amos was quiet for a long moment. How long before Cutter rides back to Coyle, he asked. 2 hours, maybe 3. Coyle's East Ranch Camp is about 12 miles from where you stopped them. And then Coyle rides out himself? No. Coyle doesn't ride out himself. He sends more men. He'll send all 14 and tell them to bring me back quiet if they can and not quiet if they can't. He'll move tonight. He might wait until morning. He thinks of himself as a patient man. Patient men get surprised more often than impatient ones, Amos said. They get used to time working for them. He looked at her. I know a man. Name of August Teale. Ran a stage relay station about 8 miles from here. Used to run dispatches for Judge Harding back when I was working for Harding. If he's still there, he's got a wire connection and a pair of draft horses we could borrow. A wire to where? Guthrie. And if the marshal's office in Guthrie is slow, I know the name of a deputy out of Wichita who isn't in anybody's pocket and doesn't plan to be. Della looked at him. You're going to help me. I told you I would. You said you'd take me to this spring and let me decide. You didn't say anything about helping me." "No," he said. "But here we are." She picked up her cup and finished the cold coffee at the bottom of it, and for just a moment she felt something that was not quite forgiveness and not quite trust, but was moving in those directions. The way country looks different when the light shifts, when the angle changes and things you thought you knew take on new shapes. 8 miles, she said. "We can be there before dark." They broke camp with a practiced efficiency that came from necessity rather than comfort. Amos kicked the fire apart and covered the coals with sand. Della refilled the canteens at the spring. They moved without talking much, the way people move when they're conserving for something harder that's coming. Amos Mercer's horse was a bay gelding, 17 hands, the kind of horse a man buys when he needs an animal that can work hard and keep going when other horses stop. He rode with the ease of a man who'd spent more of his life on horseback than off, and he kept Della on his left, between himself and the cottonwood line along the creek where cover was thickest. He was watching the country. She caught him doing it the second mile out, the slow sweeping attention, left right behind, the kind of scanning that had become so habitual he probably wasn't even aware of it anymore. He was looking at the distant rim rock to the east. He was looking at the place where the trail bent around a dry wash. He was looking at everything the way a man looks at things when he's spent years in country where looking at things wrong got people killed. "How many?" she asked. He looked at her. "How many men have you been in a situation like that with?" she said. "On the wrong end of the numbers." He thought about it. "A few times," he said. "What's the most?" 11, he said. "Outside Cimarron in 1873. 3 of us, 11 of them. We were running a remuda back to Fort Supply and they wanted the horses. What happened? We kept the horses." She waited for more. He didn't offer it. "You're not going to tell me how," she said. "It's not a story that makes for pleasant riding," he said. She let it go. She had the shape of the answer well enough. The shape was, he knew what he was doing. The shape was, he had stood with bad numbers before, and the numbers had not won. The relay station was still there. August Teale was still there, too, a compact, white-haired man of around 60, with a handshake like a bear trap, who looked at Amos Mercer for about 4 seconds before his eyes changed in a way that told Della these men had a history that predated introductions. "Amos," Teale said. "August," Amos said. "Been a while. 9 years, give or take. You're older," Teale said. "So are you." Teale looked at Della. He looked at Amos. He looked at the direction they'd come from. "Trouble?" he said. "A man named Brick Coyle out of Pinto Wells," Amos said. "Has the territorial judge in his pocket and about 14 riders who'll be looking for this woman before morning." Teale sucked his teeth. "Coyle," he said. "I know the name. Heard stories." He paused. "How many of those riders is going to end up here?" "Probably all of them," Amos said. "Depends on how smart their tracker is." Teale looked at Della again. "You brought trouble to my station, Amos." "I know it," Amos said. "I'm sorry for that. But I need that telegraph wire and I need those 2 Percheron mares, and I'd be grateful for any help you can spare." Teale was quiet for a long moment. The wind moved through the cottonwood trees around the station with a sound like slow water. "I'll get you the wire," he said. "And the mares. And I've got 2 sons who can shoot." "I'm obliged," Amos said. "Don't be obliged," Teale said. "Just don't let them burn the place down." They sent the wire to Guthrie and a second wire to the deputy in Wichita, a man named Sam Aldridge, who Amos had ridden with in the old Kansas City days. Della sat at the table in the main room of the relay station and wrote out a summary of the letter in her satchel, the clearest and most factual version she could manage. The names and dates and amounts, the 2 disappeared men, the water rights, the judge and the deputy marshal in Pinto Wells. Amos read it over her shoulder and didn't offer a single word of change. "It's good," he said. "I know it is," she said. He almost smiled. "That's enough for tonight," he said. Sleep. I'll take first watch. You need sleep too. I'll take first watch, he said again. She looked at him. I slept on the ride over, he said, which was an obvious lie, delivered with a straight face. And she knew it, and he knew she knew it, and somehow that lie was the most familiar thing about him, the most like the dim, early memory of a man who had not been able to stop working even when work was done. She slept. She dreamed about the trail, about the 6 horses and the crescent of riders, and about the man in the gray hat stepping out of the Shimmer. And in the dream she knew right away who he was, the way you know things in dreams before the knowing has to travel all the way to your brain. She woke at 2 a.m. to the sound of horses, not 1 or 2 horses, many horses, moving carefully in the dark, the way men move when they're trying to come in quiet. She was on her feet with her boots on before she'd fully come awake. She found Amos in the doorway, already there, the Colt in his hand, looking out at the dark country to the north. How many, she said. 12, I think. Maybe 14. They left 2 back on the road. He spoke in a low voice, the same flat, unhurried tone he'd used on the trail. Teale's boys are in the barn loft. Teale himself is in the grain store with the Sharps. I need you in the back room with the door barred. No. He looked at her. In the dark she couldn't read his face. Della. I'm not going in the back room, she said. This is my fight. Coyle is after me. What do you need me to do? A long beat of silence. The horses outside had stopped moving. You know how to shoot, he said. My mother taught me, she said. She used to say it was a useful skill for women who made the choices she made. He handed her a short-barreled revolver he'd been carrying in his coat pocket. It was loaded, 5 rounds. He pressed it into her hands with the same matter-of-fact certainty he did everything. Not gentle, not rough, just sure. The water trough, he said. 12 feet to the left of the door. You stay behind it. Nobody comes through that door, but you shoot for the horse first, not the rider. Horses go down. Men slow down. Shoot the horses, she said. First choice. If a man raises a rifle at you, you don't have to shoot the horse. I know, she said. The night outside the relay station was very quiet now, the way it goes quiet when the insects and the small animals pick up on something large and dangerous and stop whatever they're doing to wait. The stars were out hard and sharp. The moon was 3/4, which was enough to shoot by and enough to be shot at by, which put everybody on the same footing. Wade Cutter's voice came out of the dark from about 40 yards north. We know you're in there. Amos Mercer. The name carried a weight that Cutter hadn't meant for it to carry. He'd said it like a trump card, like knowing the name was the same as having the advantage. What it actually was confirmation that he'd ridden 12 miles in the dark to tell a man that he knew who he was. Amos said nothing. There's 13 of us out here, Cutter said. You've got what? 3 men and a girl. Send her out, and everybody goes home. Still nothing from Amos Mercer. Last chance, Cutter said. His voice had gone tight, the way voices do when the patience runs out and what's underneath it shows through. We'll burn the station. I'd think very carefully about that, Amos said. His voice was calm, and it carried in the clear night air with no trouble at all. A man named Aldridge out of Wichita got a wire tonight. He's riding with 6 men, and he'll be here by mid-morning. You burn this station, that's arson on territorial land, and Aldridge won't take a judge in Fort Smith's pocket for an answer. Silence from the dark. I've got a second piece of paper, too, Amos said. Names and dates and dollar amounts. 2 men who went missing after they argued with Brick Coyle about water rights. I'd be very careful, Cutter, about what you do in the next 10 minutes, because it's going to be in that paper. More silence. Then movement out there in the dark, horses shifting, men leaning together to talk, the creak of leather and the low murmur of voices in argument. Della, crouched behind the water trough with the revolver in both hands, felt the moment the balance shifted. She'd spent 8 months living with a man who thought power was a thing you held over other people, and what she'd learned, slowly and at considerable cost, was that the only real power was the kind that came from knowing more than the other person thought you knew, and being willing to use it. Amos Mercer had just used it. One of the riders at the back of Cutter's group peeled away from the others and rode north in the dark, moving fast, heading for Pinto Wells. Then another, then 3 more. Cutter's voice, when it came again, was quieter. "This isn't finished, Mercer. I'm aware of that," Amos said. "But for tonight it is. Ride on, Cutter." A long silence, then the sound of horses turning. Then the slow sound of them moving away. Not running, still not running, still doing the thing where they wanted you to know they were making a choice and not being chased. 5 men had ridden north. 8 were riding away east. That left Cutter somewhere in the dark with, at most, 4 or 5 of his own. "Teale," Amos called. "Here," came the voice from the grain store. "Keep watching east. They may circle back." Watching. Della straightened up slowly from behind the trough. Her knees ached. Her hands were steady. She looked at Amos, who was standing in the doorway exactly as he'd been standing before any of it started. Like the 13 men in the dark had been no particular disturbance to his constitution. "You told them about Aldridge," she said. "Yes. Is Aldridge actually coming?" "Depends on when he gets the wire. He'll come, but maybe not by morning. So it might have been a bluff." "Part of it," he said. He holstered the Colt. "The part about the paper wasn't. That was true." He looked at her. "You stayed at the trough. You told me to. A lot of people don't do what you tell them when there are men outside with rifles." "I did what made sense," she said. "Yes," he said. They sat up through the rest of the night, watching in shifts, listening to the country settling back into its nighttime sounds. August Teale's sons were solid men, quiet and unhurried in the way of people who'd grown up in hard country and understood that panic was something you couldn't afford and couldn't take back. They spelled each other through the dark hours without complaint. Dawn came slowly, the sky going from black to purple to the color of ash, and with it came Sam Aldridge. He rode in from the north at 6:30 with 5 deputies and a territorial warrant signed by a judge in Guthrie who was not in Brick Coyle's pocket and did not plan to be. He was a compact man with a gray beard and the deliberate manner of someone who'd been doing this long enough to have run out of surprises. He knew Amos Mercer. He shook his hand. He looked at Della, and he took her letter and he read it, standing in the yard in the morning light, while his horse stood behind him and the cottonwoods dripped dew. He read it a second time. 2 disappeared men, he said. Names, dates, and the last known whereabouts of both. Della said. A man named Corgan, who had water rights, south of Pinto Wells, and a man named Etter, who had a small holding along the same creek. Both disappeared within 3 weeks of formally disputing Coyle's claim on the water. "That's a serious allegation," Aldridge said. "I know it is," Della said. "I spent 6 months being careful about what I put in that letter." Aldridge folded the letter and put it in his coat. He looked at Amos. "Cutter and the rest rode east last night," Amos said. "Back toward Coyle's main spread, I'd guess. They'll be there by now." "Then that's where we go," Aldridge said. He looked at Della. "You'll need to come. Your testimony matters. If Coyle's got Judge Crumby in his pocket, it's going to take the Guthrie court to sort this out, and the Guthrie court will want to hear from you directly." "I know," she said. "I'm ready." They rode for Pinto Wells at 7 in the morning. All 8 of them, August Teale and his sons included. Teale, on a mule with the sharps across his saddle and the look of a man who had made a private decision about how this was going to go, and was at peace with it. Della rode between Amos and Aldridge. She had the revolver Amos had given her the night before in her coat pocket, though she didn't expect to need it. What she expected was law, real law, the kind with paper and authority behind it, the kind she'd spent 6 months building a case for. Brick Coyle was at his main house when they rode up. He came out onto the porch, all square jaw and pale eyes and confidence, wearing the good coat he wore when he wanted to remind people of the difference between his money and theirs. He saw Aldridge's badge first, which made his eyes go careful. He saw the 6 deputies, which made them go more careful. Then he saw Della, riding straight-backed with her chin up, and whatever he'd been about to say died somewhere between his chest and his mouth. Then he saw Amos Mercer. He knew the face. Della saw the moment he placed it, saw the calculation leave his eyes, and something else come in, something she'd never seen in Brick Coyle's face before. Not fear, exactly. Fear was too simple a word for it. It was something more like a man who has just looked at a map and realized he is standing in a place he did not mean to stand. Brick Coyle, Aldridge said, and he read from the warrant, and Wade Cutter came out of the barn and stopped cold when he saw what was in the yard. And the other men spread around the property did the slow, careful thing that men do when they are looking at the math and finding that the math is not in their favor. Coyle tried words first. He always tried words first. He was good at words, good at reframing things, good at making what he had done sound like what someone else had started. Aldridge let him talk for about 90 seconds and then raised a hand and said, "I've got 2 names here. Corgan and Etter. You want to do this on the porch, or do you want to ride quiet?" Coyle rode quiet. He rode quiet because what was in that letter was enough, and because the 2 deputies Aldridge had sent to Fort Smith 3 hours earlier with a copy of the warrant were going to be a problem for Judge Crumby, that couldn't be made to go away easy. He rode quiet because Amos Mercer was standing in that yard watching him with those flat, certain eyes. And the thing about Amos Mercer's eyes was that they'd seen men try the alternative, and they showed it. Wade Cutter was arrested too. So were 2 of the other riders whose names appeared in Della's documentation. It took the rest of the morning to sort through, and then most of the afternoon, and by the time the deputies rode out with their prisoners toward the territorial court in Guthrie, the sun was getting low and painting the flats in the orange and copper colors of a Kansas September evening. Della stood on the porch of Coyle's main house, which was going to have to be sorted out by lawyers, but which was no longer Brick Coyle's in any way that mattered, and she watched the dust of Aldridge's party settle in the north. Amos stood a few feet away, leaning on the porch rail, hat in hand, turning it slowly in his fingers the way he did when he was thinking about something he didn't know how to say. The 2 Cheyenne trackers Coyle had used had ridden south at sunrise and hadn't come back, which Aldridge said was fine, and which Amos agreed with. Some problems solved themselves when the force holding them together gave way. "Teale's going back tonight," Amos said. "I know." I thanked him. "He said you were welcome. He's a good man." "Yes," Amos said. "He is." A long quiet settled between them. The sky went from orange to the deep bruised purple of a territory evening, and the first stars came out hard and steady over the flat country. "I'm going to Guthrie," Della said. "I need to be there for the proceedings. Aldridge said it could take a month, maybe 6 weeks." "I know. After that, I don't know yet." She looked at him. "I'm 22 years old, and I don't own anything, and I haven't had anything that was mine in 8 months, so I don't know yet." "That's fair," he said. "I'm not saying I forgive you," she said. "I know. I'm saying I'm not forgiving you. I'm saying there's space for something that I don't have a name for, and I'm not going to try to name it tonight." Amos Mercer looked at the darkening country, the first nighthawks cutting through the dusk over the grassland, the far lights of Pinto Wells beginning to glow on the south horizon. "That's more than I had any right to expect," he said, and he meant it. She could hear that he meant it the way you can hear when a man is talking about something real instead of something he thinks he ought to say. "Guthrie's a long ride," she said. 110 miles, give or take. Aldridge and his men are going straight through." "Yes," Amos said. "They are." "You could come as far as Guthrie," she said, "if you wanted. I'm not asking you to stay after. I'm not making any promises about what comes after. But you could come as far as Guthrie." He was quiet for a long moment. He looked at his hat still turning in his hands, and then he put it on his head and looked at her. "All right," he said. "All right," she said. They rode out at first light, south and east toward Guthrie, with the territory waking up around them, the hawks going up off the flats, and the light coming pink and gold over the rim of the world. They didn't talk much in that first hour. Didn't need to. There was something said in the riding itself, in the fact of the two of them heading the same direction at the same speed, and it was too new and too fragile to put words around, and Della was smart enough to know that. What she knew, in the way you know things when you've been through something hard enough to strip away the noise, was this: a woman who builds a 6-month case with her own hands while living inside the enemy's house is not a woman who needs saving. What she needed, what she had never had, was someone at her back who could do what she couldn't do herself. And what she couldn't do herself was stand in open country against 6 riders and say, "Put her down," in a voice that made it happen. Her father could do that. That was something. It wasn't everything. It wasn't anywhere near everything, and she held on to that clearly, the way you hold on to honest things when sentiment is pushing you towards something easier. He'd been gone 9 years. He'd made a decision that had left her alone, and decisions like that don't dissolve in a night and a morning just because the man who made them turns out to still know how to shoot. But he'd come. 11 days of riding, and he'd come to this crease of land between Kansas and the territory looking for his daughter. And on that trail in the heat, alone against 6 men with rifles, he'd said 4 words, and meant them. The territory stretched ahead of them wide and golden and already hot, the kind of day that made promises it may or may not keep. Sam Aldridge's dust was visible on the horizon, a mile ahead, moving south. They caught up to it before noon. Somewhere in the proceedings in Guthrie, Brick Coyle would answer for what he'd done to his neighbors, and what he'd tried to do to his neighbors, and what his riders had done in his name. The 2 disappeared men, Corgan and Etter, would have their names in a court document, which was not justice, but was at least acknowledgment, which was more than they'd had before. The circuit judge in Fort Smith was going to have a difficult conversation with the Guthrie court about certain arrangements he'd made that a judge is not supposed to make. Deputy Selby in Pinto Wells, the man with 3 children and an expensive wife, would resign his position before the month was out. Della heard later that he went back to Ohio to sell farming equipment. She hoped he slept better there than he had in the territory. Sam Aldridge got a commendation from the territorial governor, which he stuck in a drawer and didn't mention again. August Teale told the story at his relay station for 20 years, got a little longer every time. Though the essential facts never changed, Amos Mercer had walked out of the heat Shimmer and said 4 words, and the counting was over. Now, friends, we're coming up on the end of this road, and before I let you go, I want to say something about what Amos Mercer was and wasn't. He wasn't a hero in the storybook sense. He was a man who'd made a terrible choice and lived with it for 9 years, and when the chance came to do something right, he didn't waste it. That's not heroism exactly. That's just a person deciding to be better than their worst decision. Della Mercer was something else. She was the one who built the case. She was the one who held her nerve in that house for 6 months and kept her face blank and collected the names and dates and amounts that put Brick Coyle in front of a territorial court. She was the one who said, when her father handed her a revolver and told her to stay behind a water trough, that she'd stay. And she did stay, and she was ready when she had to be. What Amos brought her was the 4 words on the trail and the gun on Cutter and the name that made 13 men in the dark think twice. What Della brought was everything else. They got to Guthrie on the 3rd day, and Della testified, and the case moved forward, slow as everything moves in courts, but forward. Amos stayed for the first 2 weeks, and then looked at her one morning across the table in the rooming house, where they'd taken separate rooms, and said he thought maybe he'd ride west for a bit, if she thought she was squared away. "I'm squared away," she said. "I'll write," he said. "If you do," she said, "I'll write back." He tipped his hat. He went west. He wrote from New Mexico Territory, then from Colorado, letters that were short and factual and contained, in their way, more than men like Amos Mercer usually managed to say in letters. She wrote back. What passed between them across those letters over the years that followed was not reconciliation exactly, or not all at once, but something that grew in the same direction as reconciliation. And that, in the end, was about as much as two honest people, broken by different things, could manage. And somewhere out there, in the broad and weather-beaten country of the Kansas Indian Territory line, the trail where 6 riders dragged a runaway girl through the summer dust still runs between the chaparral and the dry flats. The mesquite is still there. The heat shimmer still rises off the creek clay in July, and somewhere in the thinning air of that old country, the echo of a man's voice saying 4 words to 6 rifles in the white afternoon still lives. The way the only things that last are the ones spoken without hesitation and meant from the bone. Put her down, boys. And they did. If that story moved you even a little, I'd be grateful if you'd leave a like and subscribe to this channel. Tell me where you're listening from, and what time it is there, and which story you'd like to hear next. We've got more of these old trails to ride, more names worth remembering, more moments where the quiet man stepping out of the dust turns out to be the one thing standing between cruelty and consequence. Until our trails cross again, partner, keep your powder dry, and keep your word. This is a work of fiction. Names, places, and events are the product of imagination, created with the assistance of AI story tools. Any resemblance to real persons or historical events is coincidental. The stories on this channel are meant to entertain, to honor the spirit of the American frontier, and to remind us that courage has never belonged to any one face or name.